morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. Glad you were with us here today. I understand we're having a little bit of an issue on both Facebook and I believe it's the X platform here right now. So, all right, so we're squared away and good to go on all platforms here. So that is good news. We're glad that you're with us. What a wild show it's going to be, recapping what was just a very, very just bonkers weekend with the Ole Miss upset at the hands of Florida, the Alabama upset at the hands of Oklahoma, and then Texas A&M goes out and loses to Auburn. But the thing that matters most is the Alabama loss, because lo and behold, all of a sudden now, Georgia is in the SEC championship. What does it mean? Well, on today's show, I'm going to explain why it's perhaps not as dire of a situation as some of you think it might be, or as the narrative has been that Lane Kiffin put out, that no one wants to be in the SEC championship. Things might not quite be that way anymore. A lot of facts have changed since all that narrative started. Also, in addition to that, there was, of course, one big problem that seemed to come to the forefront for Georgia against UMass on Saturday. What does that mean for the upcoming game against Georgia Tech this weekend? And then anything that comes up after that, we're going to talk about that today, too. Jon Stinchcomb stops by. As I said before, a lot to recap from one of the craziest weekends in a sport that seems to give us nothing but crazy weekends. So it is all on the way. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, viewed to be the best.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Let me start out by wishing all of you a very happy Thanksgiving week as we kind of roll into that. I love Thanksgiving. We have so much to be grateful for, and over the course of our time together the next few days, hopefully we get a chance to properly express that gratitude. Certainly thankful for all of you who tune in each and every day, whichever platform you choose to use. Now, you know the news as it unfolded late Saturday night, so let's jump into that off the top here today. And I think it is fair to say that longtime Georgia fans sort of understand that Georgia has had a little bit of a strange relationship with the SEC championship game. For instance, in 2007, Georgia probably missed out on a chance to play for the BCS national title that year because they weren't in the SEC championship. You remember that Georgia, after a crazy kind of final weekend of the regular season, the top teams all lose. Georgia had been sort of sitting there at 3, should have been ready to kind of move into that championship game, but there was this big revolt against Georgia of, oh, no, you can't have them in the SEC in the national championship game. They're not even going to play in the SEC championship. So therefore, the fact that Georgia wasn't in the SEC championship was the thing that kept them out of a chance to play for the national championship. And then lo and behold, a few years later, like say 2018 or this past year, the fact that Georgia did play in the SEC championship was the reason they could not play for a national championship. So somehow Georgia's sort of been on the wrong side of the national championship picture as it relates to the SEC championship on both sides of the issue many times in the past. So, of course, some would say, and I say this sarcastically, of course, in the 1 year where kind of, at least theoretically, nobody wants to be in the SEC championship, well, of course, that's where Georgia's going to have to be, kind of continuing what has been a strange relationship with Georgia and this game over the course of time. And total honesty, total confession, I'm sitting there on Saturday. Nobody really loves the noon starts, but there is one thing the noon starts are really good for, which is that gives you a chance to get on home and watch some football, something that on a normal Saturday I don't get a chance to do very much. So I was really excited about, getting the post-game show over with, just total confession, getting home, getting settled in, watching some football, kind of propping my feet up and really just sort of, sinking my teeth into some, really fun, good SEC games, the likes of which weekends like this give us. And I'm so into it all, and I'm being entertained by it all. But as Oklahoma is doing what it's doing to Alabama, there comes a point when I'm doing sort of the math in my head, and admittedly, I have not been an expert on kind of some of these tiebreaker scenarios, but I was pretty sure as this was playing out that sure enough, gosh, if Oklahoma keeps this up, Georgia's going to the SEC championship. And total confession, because this is what we've been talking about, I have to admit, I'm sitting there thinking, is this what we want to be true? Is Georgia really going to draw what has been kind of described as the short straw? And if you're a little late to the game on this last week, it was Ole Miss coach Lane Kiffin. Now, irony is that now Kiffin's nowhere to be found in any of this after their loss. But he was the one that says that all the coaches behind the scenes were saying that you actually don't want to be in the SEC championship. And so as Oklahoma's beating Alabama, as entertaining as that is, I have to admit, I mean, I think many of you are probably in that same boat. The initial thought here is, wait, is it bad? Is this bad news for Georgia? They now have to play this 13th game, this extra game against another formidable SEC foe. Is this bad for Georgia compared to what the alternative could have been? I have to admit that I was kind of wondering that. But the more you think about it, and I'm going to try to lay out my case on this and try to explain all this, I think the more you think about it, based on how like the actual facts on the ground are unfolding right now, what was initially thought to be kind of a bad thing of maybe you don't want to be in the SEC championship, I think it's actually sort of working out to maybe be more in Georgia's favor than it initially appeared, as long as they win. But the truth is there's always a penalty for losing, so that doesn't make this game any different than any other you might play. So I want to try to walk you through some of this here coming up for a moment. But first, let's hear Kirby Smart. Now, Kirby was obviously, when he was asked about this after Saturday's game against UMass, and by the way, more on that coming up in a moment, when Kirby was asked about all this situation, at the time, we didn't know that Alabama was going to lose to Oklahoma, but we did know that Ole Miss had lost, and we did have the reasonable certainty that maybe that knocks Ole Miss out of the college football playoff. And obviously, a bunch of crazy stuff going on. Georgia's got another game to play on Friday night, and of course, Tech would love nothing more than to play the role of spoiler there. So with the idea that craziness was afoot, Kirby was kind of asked about how much he was paying attention to any of that kind of stuff, and Kirby answered the question the way that you assumed he would, his focus on what had just happened for Georgia and what needs to happen this Friday night. This was Kirby Smart directly after the game.
Ole Miss went down today. Were you aware of that? And are you even briefed on the scenarios that could happen to possibly get you in that game?
Get us in what game?
The SEC.
Yeah, I'm worried about Georgia Tech, man. That's all I'm thinking about. I could care less about anybody else in the world but my team and how we get ready in 6 days for Georgia Tech.
So that's exactly what Kirby Smart's supposed to say. You wouldn't expect anything less from him than that, but you got to imagine that entire football building was leaned in very closely as all of these crazy things that kind of needed to happen as they all started to happen, and now Georgia's in the SEC championship game. So let me tell you why I think that even though for a while nobody seemed to want to be there, why this actually might work out to be a pretty good thing for Georgia. Let me start with kind of a small thing. This is sort of more, difficult to quantify, but I believe it's true. In a roundabout way, wouldn't it be cool to win this SEC this year with the first one involving a Texas and Oklahoma for that matter, in this time in which the schedules are more difficult than they've ever been, the challenges are more daunting than it's ever been? Wouldn't it be cool if Georgia won this SEC, something that Alabama is not going to be able to say he can do, something that, all the love that Lane Kiffin has gotten recently, he's not going to be able to do that. These other programs, Tennessee would love to be there. They're not going to be able to do that. That Georgia might be able to do that. This toughest SEC that's ever been, the most difficult schedule that it's ever provided. If Georgia could win this SEC, man, I think that'd be a really cool bragging right. I really do. That's a small thing. It's not as important as the overall big picture of winning the national championship. But I do think winning this SEC in this year of expansion and in this year of it being tougher than it's ever been, boy, I think that'd be a real just a real bragging right that Georgia could take with it in the year of 2024, no matter what happened after that. But we obviously know the main goal is winning the national championship. So let's talk about the SEC championship from that perspective here for a moment. I honestly believe that Georgia's chances of winning the national championship are actually now potentially far better if it is the SEC champion. And I sort of think this for two reasons. Reason number one is this. When people like Lane Kiffin have been saying that it's a penalty or not good to play in the SEC championship game, something that's been talked about plenty, the comparison there has been between the teams that are playing and these like really good playoff caliber teams that know they're in the playoff and they're just sort of kicked back and they're relaxing and they are waiting. But the truth is in the SEC right now, those teams don't really exist. Now, is there a chance one of these three-loss teams sneaks into the playoff? We're going to talk more about that a little bit later on. I think that's actually a fairly complicated question to answer. But let's just assume conventional wisdom here for a moment. And There's a very good chance this conventional wisdom doesn't prevail, but just for the sake of conversation, now let's presume that it does. I mean, Lane Kiffin has already said that he thinks that his loss to Florida has eliminated Ole Miss in the college football playoff chase. So let's take Kiffin at his word for right now. I don't think Kiffin should have probably said that, but he did say it, and that's what sort of conventional wisdom is for the moment. So let's assume that's true. Y'all, Ole Miss is a team capable of beating Georgia that perhaps would have been in the playoff against Georgia. We know they're capable because they did. Now, the game was in Oxford the first time around. Maybe the second time around it would not have been. But, man, part of the thing about being the potential SEC champion here is you're seeing your status rise as one of the teams that beat you already this season is perhaps eliminated from playoff discussion. The same thing could be true for Alabama. And once again, I'm not ready to kind of like wash my hands of this and say Alabama's definitely out because you still got to put 12 teams in the playoffs somehow. But let's say they are somehow, some way. Let's say that embarrassing performance against Oklahoma has also eliminated Alabama. Once again, y'all, that's another team that is capable of beating Georgia because they did. And all of a sudden, you don't have to worry about them anymore. So your status as potential SEC champion is aided because as you move up, these teams that beat you are all of a sudden eliminated from national championship consideration, at least theoretically. So who does that leave? Well, think about this for a moment. Now, the caveat here, and I promise we're going to talk about this in a moment. The caveat here is that if Georgia plays poorly, something it is capable of doing, there's no team that can't beat Georgia, to use a bad double negative, but you get my point. There's no team that can't beat Georgia if Georgia doesn't have a good day. But if we're talking about Georgia sort of playing at its kind of sort of basic level, its sort of typical level, are you that worried about an Indiana? I don't think you should be. Are you that worried about a Penn State? Are you that worried about a Miami? Are you that worried about, some of these, teams that could be potentially standing your way, to say nothing of whoever the Big 12 sends or whatever else? I mean, there are a lot of teams that are going to be in the playoffs that don't give Georgia much in the way of sleepless nights, that Georgia would just be, I think, fine against. So the idea that you could win the SEC, get the bye to the quarterfinal, be sitting there in New Orleans in the Sugar Bowl, awaiting whatever comes your way. I mean, you've seen some of these playoff projections that are out there right now on the basis of what just happened this weekend. Some of those projections for Georgia actually look pretty good. I mean, I think some of those projections right now for Georgia, as I said before, if you're kind of just doing sort of the back of the cocktail napkin math here, the percentage chance of Georgia winning the national championship seems to now be going up, especially when you consider this. And I promise you, we're going to be watching this very closely. On the basis of the current rankings and the theoretical seedings that would come from those rankings, keep in mind this. You've got number 1 Oregon, who is theoretically going to be the Big Ten champ and the number 1 overall seed. The number 2 team in the country right now is Ohio State, just won again against a, at least, highly ranked Indiana team. If they kind of finish the rankings at number 2, that sort of slots them as the 5 seed. Y'all, game this out here for a moment. This is why you got to be on guard for the committee to do some chicanery with the rankings at some point, because in this particular case, I don't think Ohio State would actually want to be the 5 seed, but let's say they are. And let's say there's no way, or let's flip-flop it. Let's say that Ohio State beats Oregon in the Big Ten title game, which actually may be the result that Georgia fans should be rooting for more than anything else. If Ohio State beats Oregon, I mean, you can't really drop Oregon below the 5 seed, can you, as the highest seeded team to not get one of the byes? It seems like you'd have to do that, right? Well, if the Big Ten champion is number 1 and the Big Ten runner-up is number 5, guess what happens? Those two teams would be in a collision course to face each other in the national semifinals, with Georgia assuming it keeps winning on the opposite side. That means not only would Georgia only have to beat one of either Ohio State and Oregon, it would not have to play that team until the national championship. That's a pretty good path right there, right? Because while we're kind of down on the Big Ten, generally speaking, as we said last week, we're not idiots. We know that Ohio State would be a tough game for Georgia. It was in 2022. We would presume that Oregon this time, better than it was in 2022, that's likely also a pretty tough game for UGA. So we're not going to sugarcoat things here. If you look at the teams that could possibly beat Georgia, of course, Ohio State and Oregon would be on that list. How much of a break would it be for UGA as the SEC champion, going in as either the 2 seed or the 3 seed in all likelihood? that Georgia got a chance to avoid one of those two teams under the final and maybe would only have to play one of those teams overall to actually win the national championship. What a break that would be. So the world has changed a lot since we last spoke on this show. I don't deny that. But there is a chance that all of this, as crazy as it seems, might actually be moving in UGA's favor. In other words, assuming that Georgia can win the SEC championship, this thought of having to go on the road, cold weather, no longer an issue. This thought of, who would you be playing in round one? And is that one of these SEC teams that have already beaten you once this year? Once again, that's sort of no longer an issue, too. That if Georgia can find a way to win two more times, they're actually more set up for the national championship than I probably thought they would be just a few weeks ago. So with that in mind, I can't tell you about this today, but I believe we're going to have a really fun announcement for you tomorrow, because being back in Atlanta means the road to the national championship goes through Atlanta once again, because the SEC championship is there, and where Georgia wants to be at the end of the season, the national championship game is also in Atlanta too. So we believe we've got a pretty fun announcement for something we typically like to do when Georgia has these big games in Atlanta. We're getting the I's dotted, the T's crossed on all that today. We are hopefully, I believe, going to be able to announce that for you tomorrow, how you can be a big part of all the festivities as we kind of roll into that coming up. But the overall bottom line is, y'all check me on this. Do the math yourself. If it plays out right now like it seems like it might, doesn't it seem like Georgia is set up pretty well if it wins the SEC championship? And guess what that means? As the great dude from the Major League movie once said, that means there's only one thing left to do. Go out there and win the whole thing. And that is what Georgia's going to try to do. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We're glad you're with us. We'll get to the situation involving Georgia from this past Saturday and the concern that comes from that here in a moment. But first, thank you to all of you. We are so thankful this time of year, and we stay in constant gratitude for those of you who watch and listen to the show, for those of you who are a part of all that, and for our great sponsors who make it all possible, too, including our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia. Energy-efficient windows and doors. That's what Pella is all about. My understanding is we head towards the weekend, end of the week here, Thanksgiving, the game day on Friday. It sounds like really cold weather is rolling in this time of year. You sort of expect that. And that's all the reason more why you want those great energy-efficient windows and doors from Pella Window and Door of Georgia, keeping you cozy and comfortable all winter long. When it gets really windy and cold on the outside, you don't want that cold air creeping into your home on the inside. That's why you want the Pella product. And you want to talk to one of those Pella experts today about why it is, the right option for you when it's time to upgrade and take the best possible care you can of your most important asset. Of course, I'm talking about your home. It's not a pressure consultation or anything like that. They're just going to simply inform you on why Pella is right for you. So you can do that, have them come out and visit you in home. You can go see them at their Experience Center in Duluth. Always a great chance to do that. You can take advantage of great savings here, too, because between now and the end of the month, that's November 30th, you can get $250 off per qualifying window, $500 off per qualifying door, or no payments, no interest if paid in full within 12 months. Let me tell you how to get in touch. Find them online, PellaGA.com/DawgNation. That's PellaGA.com/DawgNation. You also give them a call, 678-638-1429. That's 678-638-1429. Pella Window and Door of Georgia, going beyond. Just do me a favor, though. When you reach out to them, please tell them that BA from DawgNation Daily kind of sent you over to them, because I know our friends from Pella. They're good people. I know what they've been doing for folks in our audience for a very long time, and I know what they can do for you. So I do truly believe they're going to take good care of you. And make sure you tell them I said that, because I want you to get the best possible experience you can get. Let me also say this really quickly before we move on. So I mentioned the other day we had a little bit of issue on the Apple podcast player. The truth is I think we're having an issue right now on all of the podcast players in terms of when the show is showing up in people's feeds. I had a meeting about that before the show this morning about what we're going to do to fix that. The honest truth is we've had a little bit of a difficult, challenging year with some of the technology related to the podcast. It's just, there's always a problem child, and right now that's what that is. So please know this, y'all. We're working to get that fixed. The podcast is always the platform I'm probably the most sentimental about, just to be kind of corny, but also at the same time honest. We've had the podcast for the longest. It's historically always been our biggest platform, and in many cases far larger than anything else. So the fact that we've had some issues with that personally bothers me. So we're going to be working to get that fixed. So hopefully we can tell you more about that in terms of, we always do the show at the same time every day. We always load the show at the same time every day. And it's just showing up a good bit later than we're loading it on these podcast platforms. And I don't really know why. But we're going to try to get that figured out. So if you've had issues, thank you for letting me know about that. If you want to communicate this with people who do listen to the podcast, we always appreciate that. But that is one of those things that's going on right now. And so we are working to get that fixed. And we'll hopefully be able to tell you more about that coming up in the very near future. We got Jon Stinchcomb coming up in a little bit. I'm looking forward to that. But for now, though, let's get ready to shift gears and go around the DawgHouse. And it's poured today by Dr. Pepper. Now, we sort of started the show by talking about how it certainly seems like Georgia's chances of winning the national championship have actually gone up. Teams that have beaten Georgia, they may be out of the playoff. Teams that could beat Georgia, they may be forced to play in the playoff before they get to Georgia, which would eliminate one of them, at least if it's playing out the way it is right now. They're getting the bye if you are the SEC champion, advancing the quarterfinals, looking at the other teams that could be in the playoff. There is no obvious grizzly bear standing in Georgia's way, maybe not until it gets to the national championship game if it can get that far. But at the same time, for a while now, it sort of seems like Georgia's biggest problem is not anything external to it. It's something internal with it. That if Georgia does not win the national championship, it's not going to be because of, oh, my gosh, can you believe how good SMU is? Oh, my gosh, can you believe how good this Penn State team turned out to be? Or, oh, boy, Big 12 champion, whoever that is, man, that team was just tough. It certainly seems like that's not likely to be the case. I think the issue is that if we're just being honest here, and I want to have a very honest conversation here for a moment. If we're just being honest here, in a very, very tough, rigorous season for Georgia, getting Georgia to show up with the same energy level every single Saturday, with the same level of precision and the same level of focus, that's actually proving to be a pretty difficult thing to do. And that's not me ripping on them. That's not me bagging on them. That's just me making an out loud observation that we probably all noticed. That playing consistently week to week against this schedule, when you're physically beat up, when you're kind of emotionally taxed, that just showing up the same way every single Saturday sort of proves to be a pretty challenging thing for this Georgia team to do. And on Saturday, we saw the Georgia defense have some issues, giving up a lot of rushing yards, some of that to running back, some of that to quarterback, just giving up a bunch of stuff. And I think the knee-jerk reaction of some is to say, well, gosh, this Georgia defense is just not anywhere near as good as we thought that it was. This team can't tackle. This team can't do whatever. But I honestly don't think that's the case. In fact, when kind of facing some of those questions this past weekend after the game on Saturday, Kirby Smart, I think, said it very honestly. I think he said it true that, I mean, for a defense that's tackled good teams before, the fact that they, had a hard time getting UMass on the ground on Saturday, I don't think that can be attributed alone to just lack of, tackling skills or just bad tackling in this particular game. I thought Kirby said it pretty well after the game on Saturday. This is what Kirby said.
I don't know that it was just tackling. We did not tackle well, but it was more than just tackling. It was, I hate to say it, I just don't think that our guys were ready to play and energized to play. Yes, their guys were. Their guys wanted it more than us. And it's very rare that I could sit up here and say that. Like, they were playing harder. They were moving us. They were playing physical. They had some nice RPOs and some nice play designs, but it wasn't about that. It was, I want to, like desire. That's the biggest thing.
I mean, I think that's a really honest assessment from Kirby. And I think that it deserves an honest conversation from us. I mean, those are big statements from Kirby. UMass was more ready to play than Georgia was. UMass was more energized than Georgia was. UMass wanted it more. UMass was just playing harder. All of these are things that Kirby Smart was saying coming off Saturday's game. And if you watched the game as closely as I did, who among us can dispute that was true? Now, where you kind of want to go with this then is, well, that is a damning statement about this team, and how dare these Georgia players go out there and, not try hard. How dare they go out there and not take full advantage of their opportunity to kind of play on a senior day at home, or, whatever you might want to say about that. But can I ask this favor? And maybe this doesn't land the way that I want it to, but I'm going to say it anyway. Can we give a little bit of grace around the idea that I don't know that what Georgia is dealing with right now when it comes to not being ready to play, not being energized, not being whatever, I don't know that that's unique to Georgia in comparison to the rest of college football right now, nor do I think it's unique to Georgia compared to previous editions of UGA, including teams that won the national championship. And I just think it's time to have a very, sort of realistic conversation about that. Y'all, you got to understand this. Georgia has been through a lot this year. I mean, they just had a huge emotional game against Tennessee. The heels after a huge emotional game against Ole Miss when they were on the receiving end of a lot of, hostile crowd, and they lost, and then they kind of bounced back and get the win. I mean, I'm not trying to excuse away what happened against UMass, but the honest truth is I really don't care that much about it because I do think it's somewhat natural to have a letdown in that moment. I think the thing that's obviously true, though, is you can't afford to have any more letdowns the rest of the way because, I mean, it's just a fact that if Georgia plays against Tech the way that it played against UMass, Georgia, even as a 3-touchdown favorite, Georgia very easily could lose that game. And a lot of the things that Georgia kind of wants to have, going for it, a lot of that gets called into jeopardy if Georgia does sort of show up as flat as it seemed to play against UMass on Saturday. I think that's true. Once again, this is not some sort of condemnation of this team specifically. I think as the schedules get longer for everybody in college football, and I mean, you're going to have to play a 16-game schedule to win the national championship. It's possible you'd have to play Georgia especially, could have to play a 17-game schedule to win the national championship. Asking a team to be consistently motivated at the same level for all 16 or even in some cases 17 of those games, if it does stretch that long, I almost just think that's unrealistic. I really do. And I'm not trying to excuse away bad effort. And obviously it's the kind of thing that you don't want to be true for your team. But let's also be honest here. Go back and look at 2021 and 2022. These were the best of Georgia teams. These are national championship teams with awesome leaders and everything else. I mean, just being honest here for a moment. Do you think that you got the exact same effort from those Georgia teams each and every Saturday? I mean, I can point to a few games, if you want to go back through history, where it's pretty obvious Georgia didn't have its full level of focus on that particular day. Now, the difference in some of those games is that Georgia could play at half speed back then, and they were going to still win because of how much better they were than almost everybody else. Obviously, now, this Georgia team may still be the best team in the country. We'll find out over the course of the next few weeks. But they are not so good that they can just obviously kind of roll it out there, play at half speed, and go out and get the win. So how motivated will Georgia be for Tech on Friday, knowing they now have to play the following week? And how motivated will Georgia be for that game, knowing they're being asked to do something that nobody else is asked to do, which is play another big game against an SEC opponent, and on and on and on. I mean, motivation and how focused and how ready to play this team is going into a game, whether you want it to be true or not, whether you want to hear it or not, it's just a fact that how focused and motivated Georgia is for the games that remain, that's going to go a long way towards determining whether or not Georgia wins this national championship or whether or not Georgia gets in a position to win the national championship. That's going to be a big part of it. So what do you do about this? Here's one thing I think would make it easier. If Georgia scores, everything gets easier. The defense that's having to go out there and, play physical and attack against these offenses that are designed to exploit every little blemish, every little weakness. Boy, doesn't that group have pressure taken off of it if Georgia's scoring some points? And doesn't the act of playing football get more fun when you're scoring? And I do think it was kind of an interesting takeaway from Saturday's game, even against a weak opponent, that Georgia, the week after its most consistent for 4 quarters offensive effort against Tennessee, followed that up with a good fast start against UMass and scored a bunch of points. Opponent dependent, of course, but it still continues a little bit of a trend for Georgia. That this issue of, man, is Georgia as focused and as motivated as they need to be for a game like Tech or an SEC championship or whatever else? Well, if they're scoring points, then all of a sudden maybe they're not pressing quite as hard. You're not pressing quite as hard. football gets more fun. There's a natural motivation that seems to exist when things are fun. So just sort of keep that in mind here a little bit. That's maybe what's kind of standing in Georgia's way. That Kirby called them out for, and I think accurately so. They weren't ready to play, and they weren't energized. Well, you got to be energized. You got to be ready to play moving forward. How you get there, big performance from the UGA offense perhaps makes that a little bit easier. And that is Around the Dawghouse. It's poured today by our friends at Dr. Pepper. Now, speaking of the SEC Championship, one of my favorite weekends of the year is the SEC Championship game because when you're in Mercedes-Benz Stadium for that, you know the Dr. Pepper is flowing everywhere. Literally, they come into the press box, and they just put the Dr. Pepper fountains, the Dr. Pepper, like, cans and bottles. I mean, they just have the entire press box completely outfitted with all of that great product, and I love it. My favorite game of the year for that reason, because when it comes to college football and Dr. Pepper, it always goes together. It's a pepper thing. That means as you're out there at your local Kroger getting stocked up on everything for the upcoming games or the Thanksgiving stuff or anything like that, let the ice-cold, one-of-a-kind, rich, delicious flavor of Dr. Pepper be a big part of what you're doing, too. Dr. Pepper, it's a pepper thing. Glad to have them as a part of Around the Dawghouse here today. Glad to have all of you with us, too. So a lot to cover here. How Georgia played against UMass, what it means, whether or not being the SEC championship, actually, assuming Georgia wins, can actually aid Georgia's chances of now winning the national championship. Let's cover all of that and more. Jon Stinchcomb here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Well, let me bring in Jon Stinchcomb here, the great former Dawg, as a part of DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. And, John, obviously, the only thing that really matters for the game against UMass was, pretty good performance offensive from Georgia, some concerning stuff defensively. I think that Kirby, at least the best that I could tell, called it right in terms of Georgia not being energized, not being focused, not wanting to play as hard on that particular Saturday as UMass seemed to want to play. I'm a little bit ambivalent about that, though. I'm not going to pound my fist on the table and say, well, how can that be true? How can this team not take pride in its performance and show up and want to play hard? The honest truth is, I think the answer to that is because it's a long season, and Georgia's been through a lot, and there's perhaps a natural letdown that's just going to occur once you have a step down in competition. I just think it's perhaps an unavoidable fact. I think that every coach behind the scenes is privately talking about the challenge of motivation right now, maybe being as difficult as it's ever been. But obviously, even if I do sort of excuse that away against UMass, you do that again against somebody else this year, including this Friday, you could be in some trouble. So, how much do you put into what happened on Saturday, and how worried would you be, concerned would you be about what seemed to be less than a stellar effort defensively from UGA?
Yeah, I mean, I put a little concern into it just because you're out there on a Saturday and you're competing. With that said, it doesn't matter. Yeah, I mean, you had ended up being a 5-touchdown win. I mean, so against a much lesser opponent, it was, not great performance by the defense. With that said, does it really matter at this point? No, it doesn't. They'll have to play better going forward. Everyone knows that. Everyone that matters really knows that. The defense knows it. The coaches know it. That team knows that kind of performance isn't going to cut it. 165 rushing yards in the first half, 2 huge plays against a team that, struggled to score all year and just fired their coach. All those things are true. Yeah, you can't play that way consistently against good opponents. And I don't expect Georgia to play consistently like that against good opponents. So what are the implications moving forward? Would Georgia lose any of the games that they have remaining if they play like that? Yeah, probably so. But I don't think that that's how they play. I think it was a performance where it's late in the season. You played 11 games, and you're going up against UMass and know that they're not even close to what you're capable of. And there was a letdown defensively that they weren't able to match that energy. Now, moving forward, you played 11 games. Potentially, you still have 6 games left. That's insanity to me. And, that's a full slate of NFL regular season games, except these remaining 6, all of them matter. And that's a huge demand of resources, of time, of energy that I just think you have to look at, among other things, player safety and the implications moving forward of the demands we're asking of these young athletes. And is it realistic, or is it really just for the mighty dollar and where that dollar is going? So lots of questions, just big picture wise. But for Georgia, I thought it was a good performance offensively. If you're looking for highs and lows coming out of a Saturday, offensively looked like they were clicking and could build upon it, and defensively just didn't have the energy that they needed to get the performance that they probably wanted heading into that game. But long-term implications are pretty minimal.
So let me follow up on that then, because I agree with you. I thought obviously the opponent a part of this, but it's also another Tennessee game. I thought the Georgia offense played pretty well. You got Carson in rhythm. You have the Georgia offensive line playing well. You're unlocking more productivity from your tight ends. Nate Frazier, in the absence of Trevor Etienne, seems to be really coming on. John, if we are worried about a long season continuing longer, the extra game now thrust upon Georgia, we'll get to the SEC championship implications here in a moment, and you're worried about kind of maintaining the intense edge that Georgia's kind of famous for over the course of this long haul, if they're going to score points, I just think it takes some of the pressure off. I think it makes the team more fun to be around. I think it makes you play with a little bit less, overall pressure on you. That if we're worried about how you truly commit and buy in the rest of the season, I think there probably got to be some concern about that. If you're truly worried about some of that, boy, a team that's going to go out there and give you 30, I just think it has I think that could raise the energy level for UGA as much as anything could, and perhaps that could be if you want to get through the long grind, scoring points may be the easiest way to do so.
Okay. Yeah, sure. I mean, that certainly would help. It unloads the pressure of the defense, and overall can help your general performance. But I mean, bigger picture wise, the system is so flawed right now. I think because of the way this season has played out, that it's allowed these types of discussions to take place. The reason why the offense looked much better against UMass is because UMass stinks. The separation in talent was so drastic that you could see it every play, where it's like, all right, well, if we want to throw it to Arian deep, just figure out a time and we'll do that. So that's where apples to apples matters. And, now we're given the implications of the college football playoffs, where teams that are undefeated, well, if you've played a lot of teams on the level of UMass, guess what? Our team's going to look a lot better. The offense you're going to have less question marks. You're not going to really know exactly what you have. Now, you play better competition, they're not going to look as sharp. They're not going to look as dominant as what Georgia's offense did against UMass on Saturday. So let's not just look at the win-loss column to evaluate teams. Well, that's if we're going to retain this subjective format where we're going to put people in a room that there's no chance they've watched all these games and have their opinions dictate who gets in and who doesn't, not based on performance, but based on an opinion of a pool of people. That's the flaw of the system. So, yeah, if Georgia, you de-incentivize all these teams, Georgia included, why would you play a tough season? You wouldn't. Why would I want anything other than a glowing record against dogs, against teams that aren't very good, if all we're going to say is at the end of the day, well, they haven't lost that much? Well, who've they played? So, Indiana included. They play one game all season, and you're going, oh, well, yeah, but they've won all the other ones. I don't care. Yeah, you know who wins right now in this format? There's two teams that, to me, look like they benefited from the way things potentially could play out, and that's Tennessee and Penn State.
Yeah.
So two teams that will finish presumptively third in the major conferences, that will be able to come in and will get a home game. So rather than if you play in your conference championship, if you win, then there's no real benefit other than quote unquote bye week. Well, you just played that week, so you're still going to have that same number of games. You just played it early. But there is a penalty for the team that loses that conference, which means they're probably going to play on the road and have an extra game. So you've de-incentivized teams to want to play in their conference championship, and you've de-incentivized teams to put together fun for fans and challenging schedules. So this format, now that we've got 1 year in, those are two huge negatives that you're looking at it going, you know what? It needs tweaking at best. At best is you're saying, all right, there's some minor modifications. In reality, what it needs is some major changes, because you've had coaches in the SEC say, I've had other conversations with other coaches that say, it's probably best if we don't have to play in the conference championship. That's a huge problem.
I get that. I mean, I do think there's going to be some big talk about, what the format's supposed to look like. Obviously, we've only got 2 years worth of this 12-team, format in play. So I think there's more change along the way for college football. But since you mentioned the SEC championship, let's go there for a moment. And obviously, if Georgia were to lose that game 2 Saturdays from now, there'd be a pretty significant penalty around that. But as I started the show by saying, given the way that Georgia has now gotten in because of an Ole Miss loss, which could eliminate from the playoff, because of an Alabama loss, which most importantly for Georgia actually making it to Atlanta, could also eliminate them from the playoff, and because as a top 4 seed for the SEC champion, you'd potentially avoid the sort of Ohio State, Oregon, the 2 teams that are out there that I would say have the best chance of beating Georgia. The fact that you would avoid either of those 2 teams until maybe the national championship game, John, while the penalty for losing is onerous, the prize for winning the SEC championship is actually pretty valuable here right now. And so I do kind of find myself over the course of the last 24 hours sort of talking myself into, hey, win this game, go to New Orleans, be in the Sugar Bowl, face a very beatable opponent, look at a national semifinal game. We could probably be set up pretty well too. I think that Georgia's chances of winning the national championship have actually gone up over the last 48 hours. Do you agree with that?
Sure. With the understanding that this conference championship is the game that matters most for Georgia. And with that same assumption, if the ultimate goal for Georgia is a national championship at the end of the year, which I think we'd all agree is probably yes, then how meaningless did we just make this Georgia Tech game? And I hope there's not a single player or coach that's watching this right now, because it does not matter. It does not matter if Georgia loses to Georgia Tech. They're still in the conference championship. It might matter if they lose the conference championship. If they go to the SEC championship and lose, sure, this game will matter. But I'm operating under the assumption it's a must-win anyway. So with that said, if because of this format, could you rest your starters? Would that be a bad look? Yes. Would Georgia do it? I hope not. I hope that's not the way it's done. But this game doesn't matter. What really matters is the conference championship. You win that. These are the remaining games that you're going to play are all must win, and that's what it comes down to. But if you lose in that conference championship, and then let's say we do beat Georgia Tech, which I hope we will, and I hope we come out and bust their chops and let them know that they're still not on our same level and all those things. I hope that's what happens. But if Georgia loses that conference championship and you leave it in the hands of a room full of folks that have shown that they will penalize Georgia depending on what happens in the conference championship like they did last year, I think we're subject to be disappointed because it's such a flawed subjective system.
All right, so let's talk about this here for a moment because I agree with a lot of what you're saying. And I want to kind of let me start by being honest. I was looking forward to Georgia Tech being the game for Georgia, the home game. You win and you're in. You're probably hosting a home playoff game. And all of a sudden the Tech game means as much to you as it means to them. I mean, I don't mind telling you, we're friends. I mean, we can, and we're all, among friends here right now. We can just have an honest conversation. I was looking forward to the juice around this game on Friday, knowing it was the game that cemented Georgia's postseason. I was. Now it's kind of not that. And I'll also be honest with you. We had Joey Galloway on TV the other day saying, hey, maybe Indiana should rest its quarterback against Ohio State. So in a world where that's being had on television, you would at least sort of have to say, well, hey, maybe Georgia should rest up and, just get ready for the SEC championship and just let the Tech game come what may, put all of its attention, on the game in Atlanta the following Saturday. But here is why, maybe this is just me trying to talk myself into it. Here is why I don't think you can do that. Because whether it's Texas or Texas A&M, it's still a losable game. I mean, in fact, you look at the history of college football, mathematically, rematches favor the team that lost game one. I mean, that's a huge potential edge for Texas if Georgia is playing them. And, if it's A&M, that's still a team that could beat Georgia, too. So it's not a guaranteed win, even if you focus on the SEC championship. So therefore, I think you still need the Tech win to sort of bolster your case to be the 3-loss SEC team that would make the playoff in the event that you lose the SEC championship. In other words, in my mind, whether I would admit it or not, privately I was considering, do you just rest starters against Georgia Tech and put everything in the bucket of winning the SEC championship? And I think the best answer I can come up with is, no, you probably don't do that because you want to be in the best possible condition if you are, what would that make Georgia? 10-3? Yeah, 10-3, I guess that'd make Georgia. That you want to be the best possible 10-3 team that you can be in the event that you do lose the SEC championship. I think that's my argument, John. What do you think?
Yeah, it hurts my heart because we're having this conversation because before the losses that occurred outside of Athens across the SEC on Saturday, I was looking forward to this game, the Georgia Tech game, because Tech has played dangerous football all season long, even in their wins and some of their losses. That Coach Key has them motivated. They seem hungry. They've proven to be dangerous against quality opponents, Miami included, where you're going, okay, that this is it put relevance back into this last game. I still think, Georgia has to play good football. You can't go out there and roll your helmets out there and expect to beat this Georgia Tech team. They're dangerous. And because of the way things played out on Saturday, realistically, big picture, the implications of this game are minimal. This conversation has been relegated to the same stuff of what you find in week 16 and 17 of NFL teams that have secured a playoff berth that doesn't really matter, possibly could imply implication. Really, it's more of a discussion of, do we want to go into the playoffs with momentum or rest? Do we want players that are more fresh, that maybe might be as sharp as they could be as if they played really good football? Or do we want that momentum? Do we want the fact that we are still humming and going into every game as focused as possible, understanding that the risk is, maybe we get guys dinged up. Maybe it's hard to rev that engine into the red constantly for what could be 5 games following Friday night's contest. I hate those conversations. I despise the fact that we're in that situation, and hopefully it's something that gets rectified moving forward. It can't get fixed in a week. It certainly isn't going to get fixed in the next 4 days. But I do think that, before Saturday, you look at this game and go, that's going to be a fun one. I'm ready for Georgia to show that a highly motivated, good, improving Georgia Tech team still isn't on our level. And there's that separation, big brother, little brother. But now the different pieces that affect this game have certainly changed.
So let me ask you this, and I don't want to keep you too long. I want to be respectful of your time. But as a follow-up, the nature of this Friday's game between Georgia and Georgia Tech, it's the same as it's been now for quite some time, right? I mean, the 12-team playoff doesn't make this any different. I mean, there have been, honestly, every year these two teams have played since 2017, because they didn't play in 2020. Georgia was playing Tech knowing it was going to the SEC championship, and in most of those years thinking it had a shot to win the national championship. So this idea that Georgia plays Tech with Tech feeling motivated for the upset and Georgia perhaps looking ahead, that's actually not new this Friday compared to what it's been in previous years. It just so happens this is probably a little bit of a better Tech team that Georgia's, perhaps dangerously looking past. But the only thing that makes this game different is the fact that Tech has improved. But the status that Georgia brings into this game, that's still the same that it's been since 2017, though, right?
I don't know. If there was only 4 teams last year in the college football playoffs, right, and we bring in a bad loss against Georgia Tech right before the conference championship, then I don't know that we still get in that scenario. Maybe we do, but again, it's subjective. Now that there's 12 teams, now that here's the kicker for me, BA, there are guarantees. The guarantee is if you're playing in your conference championship and you win, you get the next week off, right? Or the next game off. So it doesn't, you take it out of the hands of a committee. It would still be in the hands of the committee last year. Even though you win the conference championship and you're probably in, it's still the probable part. Mm-hmm. This year, it's guaranteed. You win that conference, even if we stink it up against Georgia Tech. We try, we stink. It doesn't matter. If we win the SEC championship, we're guaranteed one of the top 4 seeds or 5 seeds, and you're going to progress. So I think that's the difference, is that the guarantee piece, that there's an assurance that no matter what happens on Friday, you're still controlling a huge piece of what the rest of the college football playoffs look like.
John, it is a very, very complicated topic, and I think you've given us a lot to think about here today. I always appreciate that. John, I'm thankful for you. I hope you and your family have a great Thanksgiving here coming up. It's certainly interesting times for those of us around college football. So I look forward to more of these discussions in the time to come. And as I said before, very, very happy Thanksgiving. Enjoy it. You've earned it. You deserve it. I hope all of you have a wonderful time.
I appreciate it, BA. Appreciate the show. I appreciate the fans. I really appreciate being a Bulldog and being able to have these discussions, because there's a number of teams that don't get to talk about what it looks like to be playing in this kind of postseason games matter situation. So it's always great to be a Dog, and especially during these years. I appreciate you, BA. Hope you have a great Thanksgiving, and to the rest of Dog Nation, the same.
Yeah,
go Dogs.
Go Dogs indeed, John. Thank you so much.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
So, total confession here for a moment. There are a lot of things that I think that I don't say on the show because it's perhaps, just unpleasant conversations. We try to keep the conversation as pleasant as we possibly can. There's a little bit of a filter that goes on around here. I don't deny that. So, as I was saying to John, in my private thoughts a lot yesterday, I was sitting there gaming this out of, should Georgia just play walk-ons against Tech, get as healthy as they can, pack it in. Because nobody would want that to be true, right? You want the raucous crowd. You want the great environment. You want the great rivalry game. Nobody would want this to be true. People would be devastated by that. But even if it's not good, it still may be right, if that makes sense, right? So I was thinking, should they just do this? Is that the smart thing to do? Knowing that it all comes down to, you could lose 50-0 to Tech, but if you beat whoever in the SEC championship, you're one of the top 4 seeds of the college football playoff, and your chance of winning the national championship isn't reduced. There's nothing the committee can do to take it away from you. They can stack the deck in terms of who they make you play, but they can't take it from you if you're one of those top 4 seeds. And so, in your private thoughts, you at least have to consider it, don't you, of maybe this is just the right thing to do. But I do keep coming back to, even if I'm willing to entertain the possibility of it, I do keep coming back to the idea of, I don't think that's the right thing. I don't. I think if you're Georgia, because the SEC championship is not a guaranteed win, whether it's A&M or Texas, Georgia will be a favorite against both teams. I don't believe it's a guaranteed win. So therefore, I do think you want to give yourself that chance to be a playoff team if you lose the SEC championship. And you can't trust the committee. I get that. John's saying that. You're saying that. I have said that. And no one is being asked to do what Georgia's being asked to do. I get that too. But at a certain point, you also just sort of have to play the ball as it lies. And this is the situation. Georgia needs to beat Tech. Why? Because it wants the best case possible for making the playoff in the event that it loses the SEC championship. It also wants to survive Tech in a way that it is the most ready to win the SEC championship, because it gets a big boost if it gets a chance to go play as a quarterfinalist in the Sugar Bowl with perhaps the bracket how it's possibly set up. It is a tough road, but that's just what it is. Now, here is what we need. We need for Georgia fans to be ready for Friday night. It's going to be cold. It's going to be cold. One of the colder home games Georgia probably had in quite some time, at least based on some of the early forecasts that I'm seeing. Some of you follow the weather better than I do. But you gotta be ready to rock and roll. Is there a chance that Georgia does what I think there had been some rumors they might do? They might go, blackout for Black Friday. I'd be all in favor of it. Not as a motivational play. I just think it'd be cool to do. I think black looks cool at night. A lot of people, if you're going to be wearing winter gear anyway, a lot of these coats and things like that are already black to begin with. Georgia bringing out the black jerseys for this one. Not as a motivational ploy, but just because it's a school color, it looks good. But it is fun for fans. So, yeah, I mean, in fact, that may be the thing. The black jerseys don't motivate the players to play any better, but it may motivate the fans to make the environment what it should be. It is a very interesting couple of weeks for Georgia. There are a lot of people really, really hungry to see Georgia get a big win against Tech and then go on to the SEC championship after that. This is just a Georgia team that could be gearing up for a really big run here. So I think, getting excited about that and talking about how that happens, I think it begins with a maximum effort from Georgia fans on Friday, just like you gave against Tennessee 2 weeks ago. So we will talk about all of that. Prior to that, though, let's get ready to go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And for our golden shoe, one of our golden shoes later on today, we're going to have a great shout-out to Royal Caribbean, which I love. Man, I am so happy when I see those of you who are part of our show and you listen or you watch, when you're enjoying the best that Royal Caribbean has to offer. It makes me so happy, because I do truly believe that if you want to have a great experience, going to a Perfect Day Coco Cay, being a part of one of these Royal Caribbean cruise ships like Icon of the Seas or Utopia of the Seas or anything like that, what a great time to be doing all of that. Our Jessica Slater can help you out with that, so give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her at jslater@dreamvacations.com. She'll tell you about the best that Royal Caribbean has to offer as we roll into 2025, and she can tell you about our DawgNation cruise coming up in April of 2025. Leaving out of Port Canaveral, that's the most convenient port for us to all get to if you live here in the state of Georgia. Going on Utopia of the Seas, that's the newest Royal Caribbean ship. Nassau in the Bahamas, Perfect Day Coco Cay. What a great time we're going to have. Can't wait to see you there for that. Now, let's get ready to go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean here today. And boy, there's a lot to talk about. First of all, let's just kind of get into the Alabama loss against Oklahoma. And look, we obviously are on guard for crazy stuff happening in college football all the time. The fact that Oklahoma beat Alabama is not the wildest upset we've ever seen. Oklahoma's, after all, lost twice already this year. So it's not impossible that Alabama could lose. But could you ever imagine that Alabama would lose a game like this, essentially doing nothing offensively, scored 3 points, interceptions and turnovers? I mean, Alabama was just rendered just completely non-existent offensively. That's the part of this that was the biggest overall surprise for me. I just could not imagine a situation where Bama could lose like this. And, I do think this puts I think this puts Kalen DeBoer in a pretty precarious spot, not in terms of like hot seat or anything like that. But, I mean, to have a situation like this where Bama was in the playoff a year ago, the reigning SEC champs, and now have a very good chance of not making the playoff, of having 3 losses with Auburn coming in. By the way, Auburn wins the crazy game against Texas A&M in overtime on Saturday. So all of a sudden they're feeling a little bit better, and now they're getting ready for Alabama with a little bit of momentum. And Bama's now playing the Iron Bowl, trying to avoid its 4th regular season loss. I think this is going to be a really pressure-packed week in Tuscaloosa. I really do. I really do. Obviously, I'm assuming they'll beat Auburn, but I would have assumed they would have beaten Oklahoma too. They fell so flat on their face. And let me just say this really quick. I don't know how you quantify this, but it's just obviously true. Like, you can say what you want about like the best teams of the Big Ten. We'll get to the Ohio State-Indiana game in a moment. You can say what you want about, that league and how it compares to the SEC. The Big Ten just doesn't have this. I mean, I'm sorry. I watch all college football. I'm obsessed with college football. I have been my entire life. This thing where you've got a team that has done nothing all year long, and to Oklahoma's credit, honestly, I know it's been a bad year for them on the field. Culturally, I think they're a pretty good fit in the SEC. I do. I don't feel that way about Texas. I'd kick them out tomorrow if I could. But Oklahoma sort of feels like the SEC to me a little bit. And they definitely look like an SEC venue on Saturday. It's been a tough year for them. They have really had nothing to show for it. But they were so into that game, and it's kind of one of those classic SEC things where the home crowd started building and believing more and more as the game went along. This was a fun watch on Saturday night. Obviously, it had the impact of putting Georgia in the SEC championship. But this is a pretty fun watch. And do I have this right also? That by winning, Oklahoma obviously now gets its 6th win. That means it's going to a bowl, which Oklahoma is the team that has the longer bowl. Like Georgia's, I think, got the 2nd longest active bowl streak in college football. I believe Oklahoma is 1 additional year. So if Oklahoma would have lost, it would have opened up the door for Georgia to have the nation's longest bowl streak, if you care about that. So Oklahoma's win, at least historically, had a little bit of an implication for Georgia. So let's talk about something else here for a moment. And we'll get to the Ole Miss-Florida result here in a moment. But with Ole Miss losing, with Alabama losing, on the flip side, with a team like South Carolina winning and continuing to do so, with Clemson looming for them, can a 3-loss team make the playoff? Can a 3-loss SEC team be there? Here is where I think it's somewhat complicated. Like, you're going to hear people online, and they're going to say something like, there's no way a 3-loss team should be in the playoff. Well, let's talk about that for a moment. There are going to be 12 teams in the playoff. I mean, who are you putting in? Now, self-serving, I don't want Ole Miss in the playoff, and I don't want Alabama in the playoff. This idea, especially Alabama, this idea that these teams that have beaten Georgia could be excluded from the playoff, that's part of why, if you're a Georgia fan, you got to feel pretty good here today. The idea that you don't have to see those teams again, you're guaranteed of not seeing them again, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. Would be good news for Georgia. But if we're sitting here saying, and if we're being completely candid, I think we would be saying this, as Georgia fans, I hope Ole Miss and I hope Alabama don't make the playoff. Then can you really say they're not one of the 12 best teams? And what about this? What if the 3-loss team that makes it, and putting Georgia aside here for a moment, because obviously them, if they were to lose the SEC championship, is a completely different discussion. Of course, they'd be worthy and warrant the playoff bid, but we'll get more into them later on. Let's just kind of keep it where it is for right now. What if South Carolina, who's been on a real run as of late, what if they beat Clemson? That's a team that's also kind of a fringe playoff contender. What if South Carolina beats Clemson? Well, okay, maybe they get a chance to go into the playoff as sort of the SEC team playing hot at the right time. But here's where that gets complicated. Alabama beat South Carolina. Ole Miss beat South Carolina badly on the road. So if we're going to say, well, the 3-loss SEC team makes the playoff, and listen, I think that South Carolina is really good. I really do. I think South Carolina is really good. Really good defense, and Lenora Sellers is playing far better right now, too. So if the 3-loss SEC team is going to make the playoff and people are making the case for South Carolina, why would they get in over Alabama and Ole Miss? Especially in the case of Ole Miss, who beat them in Columbia and beat them with margin. I think that Lane Kiffin, after the game on Saturday, he essentially waved the white flag on the season in terms of Ole Miss making the playoff. I think that was a misstep by Kiffin. I think that Kiffin had a blunder by saying that the way that he did. You don't ever concede anything. Don't ever concede anything. I think that Kiffin's concession, I think that Kalen DeBoer probably, if I had to guess, will be smart enough not to do that. And while it seems like conventional wisdom that one of these 3-loss teams, won't make the playoff because they shouldn't, I mean, you're going to put a second ACC team in there? Who are you putting in the playoff? I mean, are we really going to expect the SEC to get less than 4 teams in the playoff? Maybe they do. Maybe that's how it's going to play out. But I wouldn't be quite so sure just yet because if we're being honest, we would still assume that teams like Ole Miss and Alabama are probably among the 12 best. I mean, certainly they would be among the 4 teams. I would not, I'd want Georgia to avoid playing as long as possible. I mean, certainly that's the case. So do with that what you will, I guess. How about the flip side, though, of the Ole Miss-Florida upset from the weekend? What do we make of Florida here now? Well, this is one of those things where we're not, liars. We are obviously, haters of we're prominent Gator haters, and we love, making fun of the lousy, stinking Gators. But it is also just objectively true that Florida now, after having beaten LSU and Ole Miss in back-to-back weeks, is feeling better about themselves as a program than they have at any time since 2020, probably, when in a pandemic year that obviously doesn't count, they were winning the SEC East and getting to Atlanta, beating Georgia. This is the highest that the Florida's program has been on since then. And we love kicking Florida when it's down, but the truth is, when we started Gator Hater Updater and things like that all these years ago, we started that with the thought that Florida was an opponent that would always matter for Georgia and that Florida would be a formidable foe against UGA. And so if finally they're winning games and if finally they're ready to be a part of the SEC conversation, we would say that's what you're supposed to be doing all the time anyway. So it is really interesting. Let's say for a moment that South Carolina does not make the playoff. At the end of the season, it's quite possible that the 2 SEC fan bases, or who are maybe the happiest about their situation, are, in the case of South Carolina, a team that didn't make the playoff. In the case of Florida, a team that came nowhere near making the playoff. I mean, there's a chance that the 2 most optimistic, 2 of the highest sort of levels of favorability among SEC fan bases, maybe Florida and South Carolina, 2 teams that really are not a part of the playoff discussion right now. But, we don't like Florida, but we're not liars. We'll give them credit. Winning that game, winning that game was a big deal for them. And they look like they certainly have something to build on here right now with DJ Lagway, playing a pretty good brand of football here at the moment. One more thing to give you, this is sort of outside the SEC, but Ohio State does beat Indiana on Saturday. I would say that this game plays out almost exactly the way that I expected it to, with the exception of 2 things. Ultimately, we didn't get our pick right, but the truth is that we said that Ohio State was essentially guaranteed of winning because Indiana is not good enough to beat them. But we expected the game to be inside the point spread because nothing good comes from the Big Ten standpoint of seeing Indiana get blown out. And this would essentially be one of those, like, you ever watch like a Floyd Mayweather fight or something like that, where the 2 fighters just sort of dance around the entire time, no real big moments, just essentially sort of playing for a chance to get to the judges' scorecard. That's what I sort of thought this looked like. Ohio State did not run Will Howard very much. That's always a big tell in terms of, how hard are you trying? If you have a running quarterback but you don't run him, therefore you're not really, putting forth your biggest effort. Indiana has the scoring drive to begin the game. They have the sort of garbage scoring drive late. Other than that, they didn't do anything offensively. During the game, I checked the live box score. I don't know where this finished, to be honest. But at one point in time, we told you to watch out for the officiating. Ohio State had been called for 8 flags. Indiana had been called for 2. All of this was being set up for Indiana to kind of, close call in Columbus that sort of validated it as a playoff team. But 2 things happened. Indiana botched its own punt that set up Ohio State on a short field. And Caleb Downs had a punt return for a touchdown. That gave Ohio State an extra touchdown, too. And that's what I think kept this game from being inside of 2 touchdowns, which would have obviously, spoken, at least in the minds of some, well of Indiana. Now, after the game, Kirk Cignetti, the Indiana coach, says, of course, he thinks their team should be in the playoff. And the truth is, if they keep winning games, they probably will. But here's the thing you understand. To borrow a line from a famous movie, or at least alter it slightly. Look around the college football playoff field. If you're Indiana, who for you would be the easy win? The teams that'll make the playoff, who's your easy win? If you can't spot the easy win, that means you are the easy win. I have no respect for Indiana. They are a team that anyone in the playoff would salivate at the chance of playing. I think that Penn State's essentially the same situation, but obviously Indiana was the team that was in the spotlight for this particular weekend. I have 0 respect for Indiana. not only would Georgia beat them easily, Tennessee would beat them easily. Any of these SEC teams that have a chance to make the playoff, I think would just handle Indiana easily. There is nothing I saw Saturday, and I tried to watch the game closely from Sanford Stadium. There's nothing I saw Saturday that changed my mind about that. It is essentially exactly what I thought it was. A team that's capable of beating the sort of lesser competition they've been playing, but they have zero chance of beating a team like Ohio State. And if they have zero chance of winning a game like that, and everybody knew it going into the game, then why are we really talking about this as a playoff level team? I think that's a fair conversation, but they're going to probably be there no matter what. So we'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now, before we get ready to go, let me give a couple shots out here for a moment. First of all, our friends at White's Pools. Obviously, it's cold weather right now, but if you start thinking about the warm weather, the spring, summer be here before you know it, a little bit like the Griswolds to put the Christmas swimming pool in. Well, you can have a chance to do that right now with our friends from White's Pools. It's a family-owned business, fourth generation of the swimming pool business. They've been internationally recognized for the design work they do, and if you're watching a video, you see the beautiful stuff there behind Coach Rick. Just gorgeous, gorgeous in-ground pools. Also doing a great job helping you take care of it with cleaning services, repair. They'll do the water testing for you, and they're going to give you the free AquaRite salt system on any of their new construction projects. So you can find them online, White's Pools, like the color, WHITES, whitespools.com on that today. And don't forget this Friday, game day is on Friday. That means the DawgNation Game Day pregame show will also be at Jittery Joe's again on Friday, too. So you're getting ready for a great Black Friday. You want to go by there, pick up that commemorative can they're offering with their delicious coffee on the inside, but the great celebration of the best moments from Georgia football on the outside. A wonderful Christmas gift for you here this holiday season. I think you'll love that. Of course, it's Athens' best coffee shop. It's been voted that way 14 years running, locally owned and roasted for the last 30 years here. And they've also just recently launched a franchise company, which is really exciting. That means with all the experience they have of kind of mastering the coffee game here, you have a chance to get your own, great business. And what a great way to take advantage of the fact that the Jittery Joe's brand's growing so well. It's a totally turnkey cookie cutter type thing where you can really get a unique business opportunity to make a great statement in your community with a Jittery Joe's branded franchise. I think you'll love that. So go to jitteryjoes.com to learn more about those franchising opportunities. And, of course, you can always download the Jittery Joe's app, too, for a great savings opportunity there as well. But if you're looking for a great business, partnering with the Jittery Joe's as a franchisee may be a great way for you to do that. So find out more online, jitteryjoes.com, for more on that today. So a couple of golden shoes to give out here. Let's start with some Georgia fans. And, boy, I'm proud to see this. Let's see this on the screen here. Yeah, how about this from Kathy I hope I'm pronouncing this right. Cayaccio, I believe I'm saying that right. Kathy Cayaccio, who writes in to say, I think I deserve a golden shoe for the perfect fall wedding for my daughter, Amanda Weinhardt. She had a rehearsal dinner on Thursday in Athens. Friday, wedding with the bride calling the dogs. You always love that. Saturday, then, took the family to the Dawgs game, and the happy couple is now on a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. Kathy, what an amazing thing for you and your daughter, Amanda. Unbelievable experience. Athens game day wedding, and now on a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. The happy couple looks great. Y'all look great there at the game, too. So, Kathy, indeed, you get a golden shoe for that, and the entire family for a great wedding experience, and I hope they enjoy their time on their Royal Caribbean cruise vacation, too. Kathy, that's a great thing to see. Also, dog fans having a good time on Saturday. I got this from Robert. He's at Chucktown8 on X. He writes in to say that my wife and kids had their first trip to the Classic City, and to say it was fun was an understatement. Such an awesome time with our Atlanta family. The flight from Philly was a breeze as I let B.A. and his guests from DawgNation Daily keep me company the entire time. Great to see some UGA legends as well. And they shared some pictures, and that wonderful picture of the family there enjoying the game. Man, that is what it's all about. And sometimes for games like UMass, bringing the extended family and getting the kids there, just a little bit easier to do. So I love to see that. And thank you so much, Robert, for listening to the show while you were on your way to Atlanta. And I'm glad to know that you had safe travels and easy time there. And I'm glad to see everybody having such a good time at the game. And, of course, for all of our golden shoes, you see free Eddie. We have told you, by the way, that Eddie will be making, at least there'll be an announcement about Eddie here this week on the show. So we'll tell you more about that here coming up. But for now, lousy, stinking Gators. They may have won a couple of games. They're feeling okay about themselves. But listen, Georgia still get the bragging rights in this rivalry. It's been 1,479 days since Florida's beaten Georgia. That is our Gator Hater Updater. For that, I can promise you we are very thankful. And we'll see all of you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. You can trust them on all of that today. Okay, so as you can tell, it's a complicated conversation. What does the Tech game mean on Friday with now the SEC championship looming? I still think it's a game that you not only need to win, you need to be at your best for, and I think the Georgia crowd helps fuel Georgia on that. I think that's absolutely true. And, the original thought of, the SEC championship is some sort of like a booby prize, the kind of thing that you don't want, like a white elephant gift or something like that. I think given the way that things are playing out right now, given what Georgia can avoid, not having to play Bama, not having to play Ole Miss maybe, maybe avoiding an Ohio State or an Oregon to the championship game and only having to beat one of those two teams to win the national championship, if Georgia can just be ready, and if Georgia can just handle business, I think the chances of Georgia kind of being where it wants to be can still be really, really good. But obviously there is a lot going on here right now. Let's get in here and take some comments for the moment. Of course, we're glad to have all of you with us here today. John Paul Williams says the SEC championship is better than the national championship. John, we kind of started the show today by saying, just kind of a quick aside on everything else. I mean, wouldn't that be some amazing bragging rights? Like, wouldn't that be a cool thing to say in this SEC, facing this schedule, it's this Georgia team that won the SEC again? Like, that'd be an amazing thing. That would be an amazing thing. And in this incredible run that Georgia's been on, to be able to win the SEC championship this year, I just think it would be an awesome accomplishment, a remarkable feat. I really do. And for several weeks in a row, I sort of began the show by saying, I don't know how this season ends. And I still don't know how this season ends. It could be a national championship. Georgia could also lose on Friday. Like, it's all on the table. It's all on the table. But I want to enjoy as many good moments as I can. I want as much as possible, as many happy memories as possible. And winning that SEC championship would certainly be one of those. Good to see Tennille in the YouTube comment section today. I appreciate that. Tennille, thank you so much. Will Bacon says, thanks for talking to us after the game and posing for a picture with my sons. This was their first game, and they loved everything about it. You're a class act. Will, that's awesome to hear. I tell you, I love talking to Georgia fans on these game day Saturdays, and I love seeing kids coming to the game for the first time and all the stuff that goes on with that. And, I mean, listen, I'm just telling you that's what it's all about. It really is. It really is. I mean, we come on here and we make the games seem like life and death because emotionally that's the way they feel to us. But the actual value of Georgia football, not to be too touchy-feely, the actual value of Georgia football is the human connections we make around the games. That's fathers with kids, that's friend to friend, that's larger DawgNation community. There is something special that happens when everybody gets together. And not everybody gets to go to the game. Some people live too far away. Some people are just, using their money towards something else. They're trying to pay bills, things like that. But I would tell you that even if you don't go to the games, find some friends to watch the game with. Georgia football is just a wonderful experience when you do it with people. And when you do it with a family, fathers and sons and daughters and wives, I mean, it's really something great. So the best gift I ever got was the fact that my dad and my grandparents kind of gave me the gift of Georgia football. They made me a Georgia fan, and my life is so much better because of that. So that's what it's all about, Will. That's awesome to see and great to hear. Michael Turner says he wants an SEC Champions T-shirt, but he wants the 3 champs in 4 years T-shirt more than anything else, which I sort of get where you're coming from. By the way, speaking of T-shirts, I teased this earlier. Road to Atlanta, DawgNation Invasion. We may have more to tell you about that tomorrow. Almost pulled the trigger today, but I was told to put it back in the holster. Right before the show started, I was told to put it back in the holster. But we may have something for you coming on that tomorrow, though. Lesko says, is there any definitive word on Branson possibly returning for Tech? I know Kirby likes keeping injuries a secret. Yeah, I'm no snitch, so I'm not going to say this too loudly, but Georgia's being very, very coy with its injury situation right now. I'm talking about, like, very coy. So, yeah, we're not getting much on Branson or any of that kind of stuff. But obviously it'd be nice. I think it's probably also monitoring the Carson Beck situation a little bit this week. He took a big shot at the end of that game. He says he's fine, but I don't know. A lot of people have been saying a lot of things around Georgia and its injuries here this year, so hope so. CK Emmett fan says, is Ellis Robinson the doghouse? I don't think so. I think that, it's just – I think that cornerback is a tough position to play right away, but I also thought the Georgia corners had some issues again on Saturday. And so, I mean, that's like that one sort of element for the Georgia defense that even though we would say very, very talented guys, it's just not quite coming together the way that maybe you'd like for it to. So I don't know what that means for Ellis becoming more a part of this before the season ends, but like when Daniel Harris started on Saturday, I took that as a really good piece of news. I mean, Harris is sort of my guy a little bit in terms of his body type and his overall athleticism, that if Georgia has a great cornerback on its roster right now, having not seen very much of Ellis yet, Harris would be my bet to be that. But, there are a couple of moments on Saturday that for him that probably left something to be desired, just being honest. George Herner wants to release the three-headed monster of running backs. Listen, I said this before about the offense. If Georgia really does get this offense going, and if the running game is a part of that, where, you may be on like a per-play basis sort of grinding out, efficient runs, efficient passing plays. In other words, you're scoring points while also kind of controlling the pace with which you want to play. That could be good for Georgia. Mike Mazzell liked what he saw from Gunnar Stockton on Saturday. Stockton probably did not get in as soon as many of us would like for him to, and probably Georgia's coaching staff would say the same thing. That's if you want to kind of point out where the game against UMass was a failure, is the twos and threes did not get as much playing time as you would have liked for them to gotten. So that is just sort of tangible proof that the game did not go the way that it was supposed to. But when Stockton did get in, it seems like the reviews were pretty good. Steve Bolton says, any more Colby Young news? No, I do not have that. I mean, obviously, I think the pathway is there for him to perhaps return. That's what his attorney says he wants to do. That's what, Kirby Smart the other day in the public statement said, that he's still got access to the facility and things like that. So it sounds like player and team would be ready if the law enforcement, if the criminal justice system sees fit to drop the charges now that the accuser has essentially recanted her original story. Once again, if we're just being incredibly candid, this is a delicate political issue for law enforcement, right? I mean, obviously they're also going to just sort of look at the overall facts of the case. Oftentimes, as has been pointed out by criminal justice experts, that an accuser like this changing her story does not frequently result in charges being dropped. Whether it should or shouldn't is frankly not something I'm going to get into because I'm not, well-versed enough in the actual situation. It certainly seems like it probably should, but at the same time, I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to talk too much about it because I just don't know. It's sort of outside my purview. But you do kind of understand the fact is that stories like this just get a lot of scrutiny. And, law enforcement's going to have its own decision-making process about all of this. And I'm not sure when we're going to hear anything about that. I just don't know. James Crump says maybe Roderick Robinson will be back for the SEC championship game, but I believe that Branson will be out till next season. I mean, if you could get Roderick Robinson back, that'd be a big boost. It really would be. That'd be a big, big boost. A big boost. Let's see what else. Lesko says, do you think, this is on YouTube, do you think the defense really struggled or were they sleepwalking this game? We obviously didn't necessarily have to bring out the A game. Yeah, I mean, we talked about this earlier. I mean, to me, I think most of what happened for Georgia against UMass can almost solely be attributed to effort. I just think that UMass was trying harder than Georgia was. And, you know, I just think that some of that's just kind of how college football is right now. Long schedules, rigorous series of very tough opponents. I just think some of that's just the way that it is these days. I do. Let's see what else. Garrison Tucker says, how many teams should the ACC get? I mean, I just don't see anything from that league that leads me to believe they should get more than one team. That's one of the reasons why I can't say definitively that a 3-loss SEC team won't make the playoff. And that's excluding, you know, the possibility that if Georgia were to lose the SEC championship game. I just can't I can't say that for sure. I mean, let's say that Miami doesn't win the SEC. Y'all, I mean, Miami was essentially gifted. If you've been watching this closely, and many of you have been because you've remarked to me about it, Miami was essentially gifted 2 wins in consecutive weeks by very questionable officiating, just very, very questionable late game officiating, where, boy, sometimes it seems to break the right way for the result the conference wants and needs the most, and that was an example of that. So as an at-large, if they don't win the league, what's the argument for Miami? I don't see it. In the case of Clemson, I mean, let's not forget, y'all, this is a Clemson team that's playing pretty well, that's for the most part having its way with the ACC. They lost 34-3 to Georgia, 34-3. So as a non-ACC champion, what's the story there? SMU, I mean, they're going to have a record. You know, they may very well, I don't know, whatever their record's going to end up being. Not a bad team. I don't have anything to say about SMU. The point is SMU's not on my radar. Not on my radar. Could care less. Not a factor. Do they get the gift of being in without a whole lot of help? I think if it comes down to an because keep in mind, SMU's not even a full-fledged member of the ACC. They came to this league without a share of the media rights deal because they just wanted to not be excluded from the college football conversation. And so they came into the ACC knowing they're not going to get a share of those TV rights deals because they wanted to have a league to be in. So given that status as kind of not really a true Power 4 team, I have a hard time believing the committee is going to really, give them a shot at the playoff. My guess is that one of these SEC 3-loss teams could still be very much a part of that conversation. Brad Owens on the subject of Nate Frazier. First of all, I like the high socks. Didn't Nate wear the high socks on Saturday? I kind of like that. And I do think that, I think that he is one of these guys that, once again, could be coming into his own at the exact right time. I do. I'm very happy with him right now. Wire Room says it's strange how people want a 3-loss Bama team in after losing to 2 unranked bad teams. And last year, Georgia's only loss was to Bama. We still didn't get in the playoffs. Bama should not be in. I get all that. I get the fact that how annoying it's going to be if Alabama, who became the first BCS-era team to make the championship game without winning their conference, and also became the first playoff team to make the playoff without winning their conference, could also now be the first 3-loss team that also didn't win its conference to make the playoff. I do get the fact that Alabama's essentially been propped up by corporate welfare. I mean, let's just be honest here. That a championship in 2011, a championship in 2017 were essentially made possible by decisions in a boardroom. That it was just crony capitalism, corporate welfare. That's just what it was. And that if they get in as a 3-loss team, same type of deal. I do get how annoying that is. But just because it's irritating doesn't mean it won't come true. And I mean, if we're comparing the 3 lost teams here, South Carolina seems like it's the most deserving because they're playing the best right now, and they really are having a really good year, especially if they beat Clemson. But Alabama can say we beat them, and Ole Miss can say we beat them badly. So, I mean, that is an argument. You got to consider that. Lance D says you got to root for A&M to beat Texas. Yeah, I mean, whether you got to or not, I think you should. And here's the other thing, too. I don't care if it does cost the SEC a playoff spot. The next Texas loss, I think, should end their season. I just do. Whether it's to A&M, whether it's to Georgia in the SEC championship. You have beaten no one. You've beaten no one. Now, I don't think that's going to be the case either, but not only do I think you ought to be rooting for Texas to lose just because it's fun to do, but I think that you also ought to be rooting for, even if it hurts the SEC as in terms of the number of playoff teams it gets, you ought to be rooting for Texas to miss the playoff. Gary Holt says, I said this year was going to be fun, but it's been crazy. Yeah, so I guess I'm kind of conflicted about this. It's really, really crazy right now. It's very complicated. I'm not even sure it's good. It's certainly not probably, in all ways fair. It seems like it's a much harder, situation on Georgia. The last few years have kind of been that way. But it's still kind of fun, though, right? I mean, this is a fun conversation. I think it's kind of fun. Let's see. Yeah, Ken Feinberg does point out that the one benefit to playing on Friday is the fact that Georgia will have that extra day to get ready for the SEC championship, which, in all honesty, I mean, who knows what's true. But what I'd heard, sort of the rumor mill from people who know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody, is that Clemson, who just hates the ACC, essentially told the ACC they wouldn't play in this game, that they wanted to put the Clemson-South Carolina game on Black Friday night, and Clemson said, no, we're not doing it. And so what I heard is that Georgia was sort of okay with doing this, even though it's a high school Friday night in Georgia, that Georgia was sort of okay with this is what I heard. I don't know if it's true. Because you play the game on a Friday night, a little extra juice to the crowd. Maybe that kind of makes this game more fun than it's been in a while. And also, with the presumption that you might be in the SEC championship, you do get the extra day to get ready for it. So that's what I heard. I don't know if it's true. Oh, yeah, by the way, James Crump pointing out the same officiating crew from the Georgia-Texas game was the same one that wiped off the Alabama touchdown on the, what do you call it? But basically the illegal procedure where they were saying that Ryan Williams was covered up, which he was not. That is amazing. Now, I was joking with somebody about this. What I was really hoping would happen is, much like they reviewed the pass interference against Georgia, which was not reviewable, I was really hoping they would review that and change their mind, even though it's not reviewable, just sort of keep their gimmick going. But what an awful officiating crew. It's just terrible. It's just terrible. And the problem with officiating is this. The true powers that be, this is even true at the NFL level, although I believe NFL officiating is probably better than college officiating. I think the interpretation of some NFL rules are stupid, but I think the overall administration of the game at the NFL level is obviously far better. But even at the NFL level, one of the reasons why bad officiating doesn't get fixed is because there's no real motivation to fix it. There's no incentive to fix it. Like, in other words, if I said to you on Saturday afternoon, if I saw you in Athens, I'd be like, hey, I'm going to go home and I can't wait to just sort of prop my feet up and watch some of these really good football games. I'm going to be watching Alabama and Oklahoma. There's no way you'd have said to me, man, I'm not wasting my time with that. The officiating's going to be terrible. That's just sort of a fact that, like, bad officiating does not make people tune out the games, that people will still watch even if the officiating is bad. So therefore, the powers that be, since this doesn't impact the only thing they care about, which is who watches the games, since the officiating, as bad as it is, doesn't impact who watches the game, there's no real motivation to fix it. there's no real motivation to get that better. But the SEC officiating is just terrible. Like, when you've got the same crew involved in two awful situations like that, how can you say anything other than that? Those guys are just incompetent. Like, I mean, what's the alternative interpretation of that? I mean, that's just rank incompetence. But there's no huge motivation to fix it because, as I said before, that doesn't make me any less likely to watch the games. Matt Rugavina says the college refs are giving the major league umps a run for their money. Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably a good comparison. I mean, obviously, like if you're a home plate umpire and these pitchers these days, like y'all ever watch, like, you know who Pitching Ninja is? You know who that is? Watch some of his overlays of, I mean, all these guys are throwing 100 right there on the black, like the outside edge of the plate, right at knee level. I mean, and the catchers these days, I mean, the major league catchers, the way they do that, I'm left-handed, I'll try to do it with my hand, the way they do that deal where, like, you know, they frame it back on the inside of the plate, I mean, maybe they should bring on the robots, because with catchers, you know, and how they frame these days, and pitchers throwing 100 miles an hour on the tiniest little, you know, BB target at the bottom of the strike zone, I don't know how you call that. I don't. I think being a home plate umpire in Major League Baseball is way harder than what these SEC refs are being asked to do. I do. So home plate umpires are terrible, I think, for the most part, but they also have a very hard job, I think the SEC officials make the job harder than it needs to be. First of all, this is true for all college. Next college game you're watching, watch where they're officiating from. I want you to notice this. These guys are officiating from the stands. They are so far from the play. And I know that some of them, you know, they don't want to get hit. They don't want to get tangled up in the play. I get all of that. But look how far the officials are from the action. To me, some of the missed calls are just, they're standing too far away to be able to see it. Jimmy Durham says he had several coaches told him that was the correct call. But it's not, though, right? He wasn't covered up. I mean, he was on the line of scrimmage, right? Am I wrong about that? Now, listen, I'm also not a rules expert, and there are plenty of things that I do get wrong. But it was the wrong call, right? Jimmy Durham says it was something to do with an eligible tackle. So if that's the case, then I want to make sure I give full credit then, because if that is indeed the case, then let's make sure we give full credit. Let's find out. We'll find out. If somebody's got something on that, send it to me. Michael Turner says he likes steroid baseball better. I get that. Let's get a few more comments. It's late, too. Lesko says, what's the point in not being able to review a call and reverse it? But you really don't want that. I mean, I'm just telling you right now, because I've heard other people make this argument of, if it's a bad judgment call like that, why not reverse it and get the call right? A lot of y'all don't watch basketball, but have you ever watched like the last 2 minutes of a college basketball game when everything is reviewed? It is a nightmare. It's a nightmare. And look, when it's your team, you want every bad call fixed, and you want, like, when you're watching your team play, you want the game called really, really tightly because you want everything you can get. In other words, you know, I think a lot of people have kind of made a thing about the fact that I don't believe that Georgia, am I right about this? Maybe y'all can tell me. I've heard people have told me this, that Georgia has not seen one of its opponent's offensive linemen called for holding all year long, that just no holding. And we all throughout the years, obviously can see all these like great Georgia pass rushers that never get the benefit of a holding call. It makes us all mad. But if we're watching Alabama and Oklahoma, or Ole Miss and Florida, or Texas A&M and Auburn, we kind of want the game to have a certain flow. So it's like if Georgia's playing Tech on Friday, as a Georgia partisan, I want Tech called for everything. Get them for this and get them for that, because I want to win the game. But most of the people watching a game, if there aren't 10 million Georgia fans, so if 10 million people are watching, the majority of people watching are people that just want to watch a good football game. And really, really tightly officiated games are not fun for people who don't have a major vested interest in the outcome. And the same thing is true with like reviewing every questionable call. That officials' judgment, if we're going back and sort of like scrutinizing every judgment call, the games would be twice as long, and that's just not what you want. I'm actually in favor of less review than more review. And Saturday against UMass, great example of that. On the one where, what was the fumble thing that got reviewed where, help me remember this, where, fans in the stadium rightly booed. I'm trying to what was the situation? Where basically the officials blew it's a defensive thing, where the officials blew the play dead, I think, right? Whereas, like, if it just sort of played out normally, Georgia would just sort of scoop it and go in for a touchdown maybe. I'm not remembering some of the facts of this correctly. My brain's fried, I guess. But, I mean, that's an example of how, like, I'm not so sure the presence of replay makes that better, because it actually interrupted the flow of what would have been a live ball situation. Let's see what else. Jesus Safe says, why even have review if you're not going to use it? That Alabama play last year where they didn't review the Bond fourth down. Yeah, it's 100% true. 100% true. And what was so frustrating to me about that is that after the game, remember the AJC had a story about this, where the SEC said they did review it, but we know good and well they didn't, because by the letter of the law, technically in college football, the rule book says every play is reviewed. But we know good and well that's not true. We know good and well that's not true. So that, and as other people have pointed out, like the Bond thing was a very big deal in that game. And it should have been reviewed because it was not a catch. And honestly, in the game, you're going to have some bad calls. You're going to have some bad calls. We really don't do a lot of complaining about officiating, I don't think, anyway. My anger back then was a bad call that got sort of dismissed. Oh, yeah, we reviewed it. We decided there's nothing to see there. Clearly, that's a lie. And if you'll lie about this, what won't you lie about? And that's what it always kind of comes back to. Save says, we all hate blaming the refs, but sometimes it's game costing or momentum changing, leading to the game turning loss. Yes, I mean, that was a huge call in that game. Huge, crucial call in that game. It should have been reviewed. And the fact that after the game they tried to act like it was reviewed, no one's buying that. Let's get a couple more on Facebook. Okay, so John King says Georgia fumbled and recovered. Thank you. I don't know why I can't remember that. I'm telling you, we're coming up on Thanksgiving time. One of my favorite side dishes is mashed potatoes. I think my brain is turning into mashed potatoes, I'm afraid to say. I don't really quite know how that's going, but somehow that seems to be the case. All right, couple of more comments very, very quick. Rambo on the subject of Julian Lewis going to Colorado. Listen, we had him on Friday. I'm going to tell you right now, Julian had a good game. Julian Lewis had a very good game on Friday. He threw some BBs. He really, really did. You let him set his feet. You let him have time to throw. Very accurate thrower. If you're in person watching him, I think he makes a lot of throws look really easy that television doesn't do justice for, where he essentially throws it into a wash bucket, on the far sideline. He throws some really good balls. He looked really good. I think he does have some pressure on him to win a state championship this year, but he looked really good. And as the heir apparent to Shedeur Sanders with Dion at Colorado, that may be a good situation. Oh, Savannah Bryant says that Georgia's been to more active bowls than Oklahoma has. So something else I got wrong in today's show. Thank you, Brian. Why did I have it otherwise? Why did I have it different than that? But thank you. I appreciate that. Oh, yeah. So, yeah, Brian says it was a fumble. Arian recovered, and they blew the play dead. Yeah, see, that's one of those things where there's no replay, you know. Let me say it differently. Replay didn't remedy the situation because Georgia would have benefited from the live ball and didn't get that. Anything else before we go? Scott Harris says, if Texas makes the SEC championship game, you think the refs will bend over backwards to help them? I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to be watching it closely. And we said this at the show at the time. Those A&M people have joked with us. They said we tried to warn you. Those people are so true. Those people are so true about all of that that they tried to warn us. They are 100% right. I do not like those Texas people. So you better believe we'll be on guard for everything if it is Georgia and Texas in that SEC championship for sure. For now, though, we're going to go. Y'all, thank you for being here for our R.S. Andrews cool down. Of course, you can find R.S. Andrews online, rsandrews.com. It's better be really, really cold this week, so get your heating system ready to go for a cold winter. They'll get you tuned up to factory fresh specs. That heating system will keep you warm and toasty and comfortable all cold winter long. So find them online at rsandrews.com for more on that. All right, y'all have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We'll look forward to talking to you then.